All the three gentlemen, Mr. Viktor Chirila from Moldavia, Chisinau, Mr. Dmytro Shulga from Kyiv, Ukraine, and Mr. Ivane Chkhikvadze from Tbilisi, Georgia, do not represent government positions, but they are coming from the civil society. Viktor is coming from the Foreign Policy Association in Moldavia, Dmytro from the International Renaissance Foundation in Kyiv, and Ivane from the EU integration program of the Open Society Georgia Foundation. So you will have three aspects which are beyond and above government positions. The technical aspect is that we have asked our speakers to deliver a first introduction in 10 to 12 minutes. Then I will ask them to react to each other if they like, and then we open the question time, questions, answers, comments until 12. Mr. Viktor Chirila has the floor.
Is it working? Good morning to everybody, and thank you very much to organizers inviting me here to share my views, my ideas about European neighborhood policy and the Eastern Partnership. As you know, Moldova has been considered for the last 5 years the successful story of the Eastern Partnership. And of course, it is no without merit. Moldova managed to negotiate and sign association agreement, including DCFTA. Moldova managed to conclude visa liberalization dialogue with the European Union, and now over 400,000 people traveled without visa in Schengen area. Moldova started to implement, provisionally, started to implement DCFTA and also some parts of association agreement with the European Union. Many new institutions have been created, set up in our country in accordance with our Eastern Partnership commitments, in accordance with the EU standards. But now, from my point of view, Moldova is entering a new phase. It's I would say it's at a new crucial crossing point with European Union. Moldova has to make Eastern Partnership initiative a successful story, a success story of Moldova itself. And this means that Moldova has to implement the association agreement and to create a DCFTA area, which would set up necessary conditions for Moldova, for our society, for our political class, to request a membership perspective from European Union, because association agreement, political association, and DCFTA, economic integration, from our point of view, is just another step towards EU membership perspective. We know that the European Union is not ready for that. We know that the EU is facing new challenges that doesn't allow it to make this offer for the time being. But we, first of all, the society that supports these ideals of European integration, understands that we should be more ambitious. And particularly with implementing the reform agenda. But now we are facing a series of very critical challenges inside our country. First of all, the main question in Moldova for many of us is, are we able to implement the association agreement? Are we able to fulfill association agenda and to create this FTA? And there is no a certain answer to this question. Even worse, we have many doubts. First of all, we discovered that political elite that governed the country in the last 5 years, so-called pro-European elite, which talked too much about European integration, and I would say that they managed to in some measure, with the support of European Union and exploiting the openness, political openness of the European Union, to get most of the Eastern Partnership. But unfortunately, the laws that were approved, the institutions that were created, still are forms without substance in Moldova. Still are, they didn't deliver the qualitative changes in Moldova. And that is because we have actually nourished, because we closed the eyes, and also the European Union, because it wanted to have this success story in the Eastern Partnership. We raised a kleptocratic regime in our country, which controls the institutions, which is not interested for the time being to implement fully association agenda, which is not interested to implement this FTA standards and rules, because association agenda and this FTA is challenging their power in our country. It's challenging their control over the institutions, judicial system, banking system, over the most profitable businesses in our country. This is the first challenge. We need, together with the European Union, we need to challenge this kleptocratic regime. We need to change it. We need to bring new politicians, credible, honest politicians, less corrupted, less controlled by the, more controlled by the society. Secondly, after the last November elections in Moldova, we had the last year parliamentary elections, we hope that those elections will bring necessary stability, a stable parliamentary majority, a pro-European majority in the parliament that would be strong enough to continue the path of reforms, to continue the implementation of the commitments with the European Union. Unfortunately, pro-European parties that managed to win the elections failed to set up a strong alliance, failed to set up jointly a strong government. And not because they have differences about European integration, about where we should go, that they have differences of ideas, that they share different principles. No, just because they haven't able to share the governmental positions in order to control the most profitable businesses and money coming from the European Union. And now we have a minority government that is supported in a way unofficially by Communist Party, which is weaker than before, and is taking care of its own survival, and is in a way blackmailing those two parties. And this government, weak government, a challenged government within the society, is not able to implement association agenda agreed with the European Union. In the last several months since this government is in power, he failed to put in place, implement serious reforms in our country. Justice reform is stalled, prosecution reform is stalled. We more and more hear very troubling news about some kind of laws to control the freedom of media in our country. We have a very serious banking crisis, which involves also very influential politicians, pro-European politicians in our country. Of course, in this situation, the trust of the society in the pro-European political class has decreased dramatically. And now they, according to recent opinion polls, they may risk to not enter the future parliament. And I would say that we might have early elections in 1 or 2 years. Next year, this alliance should elect the parliament controlled by this alliance, should elect the new president, and they don't have necessary votes for that. And there is a high risk that we might enter a new political crisis with very negative consequences for our country. This banking crisis, which involves the current political class, has affected the trust of our society in state institutions. State institutions that have to implement association agenda. According to the opinion polls, only 10% have trust in our president. Only 12% have trust in our government. Only 12% have trust in our parliament. And more than 82% have trust in the church. Well, a church which in our country is anti-European. Is the church able to implement the association agreement? Not at all. Will this government and state institutions able to mobilize the society and to argue tough reforms without this level of trust? No. Society itself is divided in our country. Is divided not merely because Russia is waging a propaganda war, anti-pro-European war in our country. Yes, this is true. But first of all, because political class failed our society, failed to be honest, failed to implement necessary reforms that would make our country stronger, our economy more prosperous. What had happened? Our country is weaker, politically weaker than before. Our economy is poorer than before, particularly because of this banking crisis that left our country out of 1 billion USD. Just vanished, 1 billion USD vanished from our country, from our banking system. And 1 billion USD for Moldova means 25% of our national budget. And there is no trust in the institutions, state institutions, in our judicial system, that those who are guilty of this would be found and will be punished. And now the society is quite unhappy with this. And there is a new movement, civic movement, that is increasing and may challenge in the near future this government. Just last week, more than 40,000 people came into the streets, into center of Chisinau, to protest against this government and against this alliance, and to make clear that they want justice. They want those who are guilty to be punished, found and punished. And if this government and this alliance would not hear these requests, I assure you that we will have a very big crisis, political crisis, in a very near future, this year. Another challenge, and by the way, again, coming back to this divided society, this political class have failed to bring closer the minorities, especially Russian-speaking minorities, Russians, Ukrainians, Bulgarians, Gagauzins, closer to our European integration alliance ideals. And now 80% of Ukrainians living in Moldova are against the European integration perspective of Moldova. More than 70% of Gagauzins are against the European integration. 70% of Russians are against European integration. This is because we communicated very poorly with them. We almost neglected them and allowed them to be manipulated by Russian propaganda. And even Moldovans, the support of Moldovans has decreased very much. If in 2005 the support of the society, Moldovan society, was 70% for European integration, now, after getting visa liberalization with the European Union, around 32% are for European integration. And again, this is because of poor deliverables of this political class. Transnistria is another challenge. We don't have a reintegration policy. We don't have even a vision which is supported by entire political class. In 2005, political class managed to vote a law, a contested law by some international actors. But though that law in 2005 was supported by 100 deputies in parliament, members of the parliament, out of 101. Now, this law is challenged even within our society. There is a new political party that is rising. It's a pro-Russian political party, socialist party, which gained 25 seats in the current parliament, is challenging this law. They are promoting openly the idea of federalization of Moldova, which is not supported by the society. But the law itself is not anymore a credible law. Moreover, this law never had been followed by a clear political strategy, a clear governmental policy how to reintegrate Transnistrian region. And now what we have, majority of our citizens living in Transnistria even don't know what kind of policy we do have with regard to reintegration. They would like to get full independence still. They would like to be part of Russia, and they are not thinking about reintegrating to Moldova. This is our failure. More than that, we failed to make Moldova an inspiring model of reforms for our citizens living in Transnistria. Yes, the situation, economic situation, and political situation is worse than on the right bank of Dnystro in Moldova. But still, they are not inspired to get closer to Moldova. And this is our failure, and of course it's the failure of Eastern Partnership as well. Russia. Yes, Russia is challenging openly the Eastern Partnership policy in our country. It's challenging all our objectives related to European Union. And it is going to be very hard to find a compromise, to establish a reasonable dialogue with Russia, to find necessary compromises to accommodate Russian interests in Moldova. They are against economic integration with the European Union. They are against our gas and electricity interconnections with Romania. They are against integrating our country in energy market of the European Union. They are against our idea and ambition to request to be part of the European Union in a distant future. So, in the recent years, they exploited very much our weaknesses and our failures reform failures, in order to build, to support the rise of new political movements, parties in our country that challenge openly the European integration agenda, Socialist Party, our party of Mr. Usatый, and all these parties are on the rise. At the same time, the political elite and political parties that represent European integration agenda are going down. And the question is, if, God forbid, we will have elections in this year or next year, who will continue to implement this agenda? And personally, I don't have an answer to that question. I will stop here, and of course, during the debate, I will answer your question about how I see the future Eastern Partnership perspective, and how Eastern Partnership and the European Union might help us to face those challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this live report from Chisinau. Our next speaker comes from Ukraine. Dmytro Shulga is reporting about the vision from Kyiv.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure for me to be here in the Central European University. A lot of my colleagues have been studied here. For me, it's my first time to be here, so it's indeed my pleasure to be a speaker in such a distinguished audience. Thank you for the organizers for kind invitation. As our moderator already told, I'm not representing the government. I'm from civil society, therefore I can be as frank as possible. Moreover, we are a country at war, therefore I may sound maybe too frank, but that's really the circumstances which make me to be very direct and open in my speech. We are a country at war for our independence and territorial integrity, for our freedom and democracy, and for Europe. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish where one of it ends. I mean, people who died at Euromaidan, people who die now in the front line, they died for European vision of our country. They died for the freedom, and for independence of our nation. It's I don't know whether there are any other country which made such a huge sacrifice for the European dream. Maybe Georgia. Georgian call of 2008 was, I mean, this lesson was probably not learned as it should have been learned. So now we have Ukraine. Just to begin with it, I think that making reference to one of the previous speakers, European security strategy, this is the also a new process of rethinking. I mean, not only European neighborhood policy, not only Eastern Partnership, but also European security strategy is going to be revised. And my hope is that it will not be the 2003-like exercise when pretty vague statement of Ring of Friends and something like this was the result. Now, hopefully, the spade will be called a spade. There is an external security threat to the European Union. There is a direct military threat to the neighbors, and our security is common. It cannot be divided. I mean, we cannot divide the security. I mean, European security is security of ours is interdependent in that case. I mean, we share the security. If Ukraine collapses, if Ukraine fails as a result of the aggression, I think a lot of other European states will be in huge trouble, and the security challenge and security risk for them will rise considerably. Also for Hungary, who is direct neighbor of Ukraine. What are the needs? What are the needs for action in the wake of Riga Summit and in the whole process of EU-Ukraine relationship? First, we need to react to the current challenges of aggression and to the current challenges of domestic reform, which is also a huge parallel challenge. There is a domestic front in Kyiv, as we joke, but it's not a joke actually, because the challenge is huge. Russians try to undermine to attack Ukraine directly military by economic destabilization, by energy pressure, using energy dependence, and by propaganda. So basically what we need to have is a coordinated response in terms of sanctions and in terms of, well, more involvement of European Union in the conflict resolution process in Donbass and in Crimea. What we also need is more support in macroeconomic stabilization from the European side. The energy security is our common security as well, and coordinated approach, coordinated response to the Russian propaganda, both in Europe and in Ukraine, and also in the broader Russian language speaking area. The sanctions policy of the European Union, well, I mean, it's not something new. I mean, probably everybody understands that it is not developed, it is not defined, it is not developed to really strike the aggressor. It's more a question of credibility of the European Union. So, like, if Russia continuous escalation goes on, then something will be, maybe or maybe not, will follow as a reaction from the European Union side. We have seen, just recently, we have seen the Baltseva issue. Just right after Minsk II, so-called Minsk II agreement, Russia seized the Baltseva, contrary to the agreement. So immediately after the agreement was signed, it was violated. Almost 100 of Ukrainian soldiers died. City of the Baltseva was seized. Several Russian people were banned to travel to the European Union. Among them, such high-profile figures like Joseph Kobzon, Russian singer. This is a huge prize for Russia. This will stop further escalation. This will definitely stop further attacks. What is needed, actually, I mean, it's also quite clear. What is needed is personal sanctions against the broader circles of the Russian elite. Russian oppositioner Navalny, who himself was kind of in ambiguous position about Crimea, but after the murder of Boris Nemtsov, he famously wrote in the New York Times that if right after Crimean annexation, all those deputies of the Russian parliament, of Russian Duma, who voted in favor of the annexation of Crimea, and this was actually everybody but one, if they all were immediately on visa ban and financial investigations in the West, this would have sent the clear message. And they are still not there. Alina Kabaeva is freely going to Switzerland. Nobody stops her. Okay, Joseph Kobzon is probably more directly linked to the decision maker who is responsible for Crimea from Donbass. Coming to the other issues, macroeconomic destabilization. We have here huge support from IMF, mostly IMF. IMF is the primary responsible institution for support of microfinancial aid to Ukraine. It's 15 plus 17, 32 billions of dollars, plus some bilateral arrangements, so roughly 40 million of dollars. But from all that sum is only 5 billion of euros is the contribution from the EU budget. If we compare, for instance, with Greece, if I'm not mistaken, something like 200 billions of euros. So this actually, I think, tells more us about the priorities. I mean, if you want to see the priorities, follow the money. So this is the priority for the European Union in that case. 5 billion of euros is the whole total cost of microfinancial assistance, the whole cost of Ukraine so far for the European Union. Again, if Ukraine fails, I think the cost will be much, much higher. But I don't think that only microfinancial assistance is needed, not only loans, these credits, because we cannot, I mean, the problem is that we cannot just go on lending money. We need to start to relaunch the economy. For that, we need investment, actually. The problem with investment is that lack of security actually deters investment. This is the fundamental problem with this FTA and the whole economic integration approach which we have now under the Eastern Partnership. The logic of this FTA means that it's not like automatically you change your regulations and then you have economic development. No, you change the regulations, then you attract foreign investment. And then economic development goes on, quality of life improves, jobs created, and so on and so on. If there is a security threat, and you cannot do anything with that, then investment doesn't come in. Then what for actually all the exercise? And this is the huge question. I think that, I mean, now there are a lot of efforts in that regard to providing state guarantees for investors on bilateral arrangements, and probably some other political risk assurance schemes need to be developed. But this is actually a very, very big issue as well. I mean, we don't need to underestimate this particular thing when we talk about macrofinancial stabilization, macroeconomic stabilization. It's not only about lending money; it's also about investment. Therefore, not only donor conferences are needed, but also investment conferences. Energy security. Here, actually, Ukraine is not only the taker, but also a giver to the security. It can greatly be part of the solution, not only part of the problem. With our gas storage infrastructure, we can and should be integrated into the Energy Union project of the European Union. And this is, first of all, a question to the European Union, again, as such, to the European Union itself. To go on with this idea of creating real energy union, and to have it, to have this its border not on the border of the European Union, but on the border of the energy community. We, together with Ukraine and Moldova, are members of the Energy Community Treaty. Georgia is an observer, to my understanding, so probably going to enter as well. So we're actually implementing even the third package now. So we are going to have common regulatory framework for energy. We need to have the common external energy policy as well. And finally, but last but not least, about domestic reforms challenge. Here, just to underline, we don't have the task to make some amendments to reform some policies, as, for instance, some member states in the European Union do. What we really need to do is actually to reform and establish new institutions which are responsible for conducting policies. So in principle, we need to re-establish the state, and we are in the process of re-establishing the state. A year ago, in winter of 2014, we were close to be a failed state, where state institutions were not properly working, where security sector was completely destroyed. Now we are still alive, and we are much more alive than a year ago. I think this is a surprise for Mr. Putin. that Ukraine still is there, and Ukraine is still united, much more united than a year ago. So in that case, he contributed to our unity. But still, the question of conducting reforms is quite, the challenge of reforms is huge. DCFTA implementation, 80% of the acquis communautaire, re-establishment of the whole sector security sector, re-establishment of the whole good governance, the approach of governance, the approach to the regulatory policy to regulate economy, and so on and so on. What can be done here from the European side? What sort of assistance, apart from the assistance which we have already now, the support group and other things? I think, well, membership perspective, I mean, we can discuss whether it will be, I mean, there is no discussion. I mean, of course, it will be a contribution to greater reform efforts, but as we are realistic, we in Ukraine are not realistic. We died in Maidan. Just, I mean, if we were realistic, we would go out of Maidan in the second day, because it was not pragmatic to stay there. It was not realistic. In Europe, we need to be realistic. We don't expect a membership perspective to be given to us in Riga Summit and anytime maybe soon. But let's be then creative. Let's be flexible. We know, I mean, given there is a huge challenge of the association agreement and DCFTA implementation, where are the examples of successful association agreement implementation? In the countries who used to be at the same time candidate countries of the European Union. So, okay, let's take the instruments which were there at place. Don't call it formally candidate status. Don't call it European membership perspective. But why not to start legislative screening? If DCFTA is about 80% of acquis communautaire implementation, why not to start legislative screening in regards to Ukraine? Why not to start additional? Why not to launch additional institution building and capacity building tools? Why not to open as much programs and agencies which are open for candidate countries, like Digital Europe as well, or Digital Europe, like education, youth, other programs, even Citizens of Europe, maybe even to some extent. Why not even to think of opening access to some infrastructure funds, at least for interconnections, for the Connecting Europe facility, for instance, and so on. So I think that this creativity and flexibility and being ready to answer the challenge is something what is needed in the coming weeks ahead of the Riga Summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing with us all this information. And our third speaker in this panel is Ivane Chkhikvadze from Tbilisi, Georgia.
Thank you. First of all, thanks to the organizers for such a great event. It used to be a time in late 90s when each and every student in Georgia was dreaming to study here and was expecting the admission letter, actually. Let me divide my presentation into three parts. My first part would be about the challenges when we are facing the implementation of the association agreement, including deep and comprehensive free trade area. My second part would be about the external pressures coming from our northern neighbor, which is Russia. And my last point would be about the support from the European Union. So if you ask me what are the two important achievements so far when it comes to the Georgia's European integration in the last couple of years, I would say that first is the visa liberalization in terms of implementing visa liberalization action plan, and there is a high expectations from the European Commission in coming days that the third progress report would be positive. And there is also high expectation, but we are not sure that at Riga Summit there will be the political statement about lifting visa requirements for the citizens of Georgia. The second positive news coming from Georgia is about the support towards the EU integration. Maybe we are not realistic, as it was mentioned here, and we are naive, but Georgians are supporting EU integration, and this support is the highest among the Eastern partner countries. It's up to 82%. But this is not unconditional support, and this is something which which I will come back to later on. When it comes to the challenges, it was also mentioned here that on the 1st of May, it was 8 months of implementation when the association agreement and DCFTA provisionally entered into force. And so far, there are rare or not at all success stories when it comes to the implementation of the association agreement. We cannot name the tangible results which was brought by the association agreement so far. Georgia actually has to adopt up to 328 EU regulations and directives according to the association agreement, which is a huge exercise. The positive is that we have the transitional period, and most of the regulations Georgia has adopted, there's a transitional period for 3 to 4 years, and there's a time for getting ready. But unfortunately, I have a feeling that the current government first does not really have a vision how to implement the association agreement, because this is the first ever such a comprehensive document they are dealing with. And secondly, there is a lack of capacity in the public administration to deal with that document, to implement the reforms envisaged under the association agreement. And thirdly, if you look at the history of the country back in 2004, in the period of 2004 and 2012, after the Rose Revolution, Georgia was championing deregulation, and now it's required, according to the association agreement, to introduce the regulations, and this is something new exercise that we are not very good at, it seems. Also, I have to mention lack of financial capabilities in the country and support when it comes to the implementation of the association agreement, and there is not a huge willingness and support coming from the business community when it comes to the introducing like new regulation, like a labor inspection office, which actually was abolished back in 2004, or the introduction of the food safety regulations, which also was abolished because of it was considered as a source of corruption. Unfortunately, the process is not helped by the economy of the country, because we are having very slow economic growth. It's around 2 to 3% annually. And there is a huge devaluation of the national currency. Since November last year, we have witnessed 40% of the devaluation of the Georgian national currency. There are two also big challenges which I have to highlight here. One is that there's a very weak state institutions, firstly. And secondly, the main decision maker in the country, and I mean here the former prime minister, is not at an official position. He is officially in civil society, but he very much intervenes in the daily business of the decision making. So far, after the 8 years of the AA being implemented, there were no parliamentary hearings in Georgia about how the agreement is implemented. So there was no committee hearings on the implementation of the association agreement. When it comes to my second part of my intervention is about the external pressures coming from Russia. It was mentioned here, and I have to highlight that first it was Georgia, which was badly damaged by the Russian aggression back in 2008, and this aggression continues in terms of occupation of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, integral part of Georgia. We have seen that there is a hard power of Russia, and there are 2 military bases in the territory of Abkhazia, Georgia, and Abkhazia, and South Ossetia, Georgia, which means that there are like 40 kilometers away from the capital of the country. And these military bases are equipped with the offensive military capabilities. And there is also another military base which is close to Georgia. It's in Abkhazia, in Armenia, town Gyumri, which is something like 70 kilometers away from Georgia-Armenia border. There is also soft power instruments, which is used by Russian Federation vis-à-vis Georgia. And first and the foremost, it's about the propaganda. Pro-Russian NGOs are mushrooming in Georgia, and they are trying to sell the narrative to the local population that actually liberal democracy is not really working. They say that look at the European Union, look at the Eurozone, it's actually broken down into pieces. EU is in crisis, and do you really want to join this club? Second, the narrative is that EU is against and it's a real threat to the Georgian national identity, and this is Russia, which more or less can preserve that, and this could be done through the church. And the Georgian Orthodox Church is actually another soft power instrument, which to a certain extent is used by Russia because it has the highest trust in the society. This is the most trusted institution in the country, having the trust up to 90%. And each and every word coming from the church is basically, it's more than the law adopted by the parliament of the country. There is another soft power instrument, which is pro-Russian political parties. And they are really gaining force and gaining strength in the country. And it's highly expected that in 2016, when we have the parliamentary elections, they would manage to get much more support than they had before. It's up to 10% of the 10-12% of the voters. What are the expectations from the European Union? It's first and foremost, it's again, as I mentioned, in a short run, it would be about the visa liberalization and visa-free travel. I know that there is no consensus in the European Union on that issue, but it would be very hard to justify why not giving the visa liberalization to the country which actually fulfilled all the criteria, all the technical requirements which was envisaged by the visa liberalization action plan. I do hope, and it would be very important, not to introduce or reintroduce other technical requirements which are not envisaged by the visa liberalization action plan after the Riga Summit. Secondly, it's about the keep coaching the government of Georgia, because believe me, they are reacting on each and every statement coming from the European Commission, European Parliament, or other EU institutions. Secondly, it's about the conditionality, and I can assure you that it works, because if you take the visa liberalization action plan, those laws, which was not very popular to be adopted, and I can mention the anti-discrimination law, which Georgia adopted 1 year ago, was adopted because of the visa-free travel. And so I can assure that this is a conditionality, and this is something which could be useful to keep dealing with the government. Secondly, I do hope that European Union will not repeat the mistake which was made back in 2008. And here I mean the dealing with Russia. Back in 2008, in August, French president at that time, Nicolas Sarkozy, who was holding the rotating EU presidency, negotiated the ceasefire agreement, and several months later, he actually signed the agreement with Russia selling Mistral. So this is something, the mistake, which should be remembered in the EU. Secondly, EU has to enhance the visibility, especially in the regions of the country, because we don't see that EU is present in the regions, and there is something which needs to be adopted, to be dealt. I know that it's very hard, and I know that there is no consensus, and it's not realistic, as it was mentioned by Dmytro here, giving the European perspective to these countries, not at Riga Summit or not in a short-term future. But there's a high risk that if these countries don't get the European perspective, they will get the perspective to join the Eurasian Union, and this is highly, highly possible. It will be very important to keep the differentiation among the Eastern partner countries, to keep the format, but to strengthen the differentiation. And I would say that it's very important to keep the principle of more for more, but to change it more and more from the EU side. My 2 points would be about showing the clear solidarity to the partners who actually have been sacrificing for joining the club, for joining and sharing the European values. And my last point would be about the sanctions. I think that EU should be tougher when it comes to the sanctions vis-à-vis Russia, because with sanctions or without sanctions, Russia would be aggressive. And it's better to have weaker but aggressive Russia than stronger and aggressive Russia. So thank you very much. I will stop here, and if there is any comments or questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Now, as I have announced, there is an opportunity for the three speakers to react to each other. Would you like to take this opportunity?
I could agree more with Ivane. I think that more for more principle of the Eastern Partnership has showed that it can work only if it has a very clear objective, as was the case of visa liberalization. Visa liberalization was successful as a promoter of reforms only because it had a clear-cut opportunity, benefit for Moldovans. Otherwise, I would say that Moldovan politicians would have been quite careful to implement some delicate reforms in Moldova, requested by the visa liberalization. But the pressure of the society, request of the society to make progress on a commitments related to visa liberalization forced them to move forward as soon as possible. And they pledged in their election campaigns, they included this visa liberalization objective in their action plans, and this actually obliged them to do everything in their powers in order to fulfill all the conditionalities requested by the visa liberalization. Now, when it comes to implementing the association agenda and the DCFTA, more for more is not so powerful. In order to mobilize the society by and large, to empower the society of a political class which is not quite interested to implement as soon as possible the DCFTA requirements. As I mentioned in my presentation, DCFTA is a challenge to their power in our society. That's why I think that more for more should include not only assistance for more reforms, which in many ways, the current assistance that our government is getting from the European Union, including the direct budget assistance, is not so visible, is not filled by the society, by the ordinary people. On the contrary, this assistance, given it to a corrupted political class, is seen as a support for a corrupted elite. That's why I strongly believe that more for more principle should include also a clear-cut, distant, even distant, EU membership perspective for our country, also for Georgia, also for Ukraine, for all countries of the Eastern Partnership Initiative that are willing to move forward in that direction. This objective would make more for more principle very credible and felt practically by ordinary people. It will empower the society of a political class. It will push political class to reform itself and to make necessary reforms, giving them the necessary arguments to do so. I was yesterday in Berlin, also attending a conference, an event about rethinking European neighborhood policy. And I heard that such an explanation from an EU diplomat that, you know, in our case, in your case, the situation is different, the time is different. And that's why we are, and also European Union is not ready. I mean, we know that we are not ready for in order to fulfill all conditionalities of put forward by the European Union in order to get membership perspective. But the purpose is not to get tomorrow into the European Union. It's just to make them stronger in order to implement reforms and to have a clear-cut objective where we are heading in 10, 15, 20 years. Because the challenges, our challenges, as the challenges faced by the Baltic countries, are even greater. Baltic countries in the 90s didn't have kleptocratic regimes. Baltic countries didn't face a stronger pressure from Russia as we face right now. Russia is challenging us not only politically and economically. Russia is challenging us militarily, using military instruments, annexing territories. That's why I think that EU and many of us in Moldova, EU should much more bolder in order to make Eastern Partnership initiative stronger, much credible, and much powerful than before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dmytro.
I don't want to speculate about this more for more differentiation and other EU-speak notions, because I think this is something which deters attention from the core things. Although maybe only one thing which I would maybe like to remember, because also one of the previous speakers of the previous panels told that maybe we need to really come back to the basics and to original thinking when the European neighborhood policy was started. I remember one of the notions which I think might be relevant still, the notion of everything but institutions, which is the offer. There was also a stake at the internal market. There was also a ring of friends. Okay, we are friends. Okay, we have a stake in the internal market, this FTA. What about everything but institutions? If membership perspective is not on offer, we are not satisfied with that, but let's face it. Where is everything but institutions? But I think that actually the real thing behind all these things is not, of course, our European dreams and idealistic perceptions of the values. We Europeans, we Ukrainians became Euro fanats, I don't know, Euro dreamers, Euro Maidaners. But in the real world, as we see, it's the interests of the member states which guide the policy. And frankly speaking, until recently, there was no interest of majority of member states in Ukraine, or, let's be frank, even less maybe in Georgia, in Moldova, apart maybe from energy security, just security of transit of Russian gas. That was a particular issue of interest for some member states, and it's still there. But now there is a new negative interest, which, I mean, there might be positive interests like securing investments, trades, and so on, kind of material interests. But there might be also negative interests, which means security threats. Now I think we can compare the situation with the Western Balkans back in 20 years ago. There is a war in Europe, there is a security threat, which affects European security directly. And maybe, I mean, if not this, then what else could mobilize the European Union for a bolder response? If not this, then what else could mobilize Europe for pursuing further integration and really giving more and more to those countries who are eager to be further integrated?
Just very briefly, one is that unfortunately we don't see that Georgian government is engaging with the Georgian Orthodox Church in terms of EU integration. There is no interaction between them, and that would be something very, very important to deal with. I'm not a naive, and I don't have an expectation that Church would change their mind in overnight, but still, it's worth doing that. And secondly, about Ukraine, I think that it's back in 2008 there was general perception that okay, they will stop in Abkhazia or they will stop in South Ossetia, and they didn't stop. Then there was a perception that okay, they will stop in Crimea, and then they didn't stop, and then they moved towards Lugansk. And now there is an expectation in some member states that they will stop in Lugansk and they will not continue. And I can assure you that they will continue if there is no clear engagement and no clear opposition and no clear no to Russian aggression. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yes. First one, second one, third one. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, Miklos Haraszti, working for the UN on Belarus human rights and for Mr. Péter Balázs's center as Director of Research on Human Rights. Thank you, all three speakers, for the very frank account on both sides, on the European side, the challenges on the European side, and on your country's side. I have one question to Mr. Chkhikvadze. He made a stunning statement that if the process fails, then your country may end up in the Eurasian Union. What makes you think that the pendulum could swing that farther, actually, than the today's policies of Azerbaijan? That's my question.
My question to Ukrainian and Moldova colleague about the association agreement. I know that Kent University had conducted big survey about particularly these two countries about the engagement in European neighborhood policy, and Elena Korostelova wrote book about that, where she argued that the division of population and elite between European Union and Eurasian choice really, how to say, should be considered in the decision-making process. And from 2009, when European Union adopted this European partnership policy, she argued that it was overlapping of interests between European Union and Russia, and from that time they started real competition for these countries, and they should negotiate and not be in hurry, I mean European Union, in sign of this agreement. What is your opinion? Maybe it was too fast to sign this agreement and to create such situation which we now observe. And for Georgia, one question. You told that the European Union should be more active in free visa agreement, but according to the last months, we can see that discussion about Georgian Pankis Valley, these Islamic States war leaders who come from this particular place now, and this Georgia is not able to how to say, to manage situation. How European Union will manage it? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Igor Sebastian from Russian Embassy. My question is to representative of Ukraine. Does Europe ask Ukraine to struggle with Russia and to provoke war with nuclear power? Then there is also a question about, he mentioned about this Maidan, and there is no real investigation of events in Maidan. Who sent snipers, who killed not only the uprising people, but as well as the soldiers. There is no investigation of tragedy in Odessa. There is no real investigation on the shooting of the Boeing. And who sent the troops for Donetsk and Lugansk? And my general question maybe is, of course, it is. I could also remind our distinguished speakers about the prehistory of Transnistrian conflict as well, what the Georgian troops did in Tskhinvali. We know well what was the starting point. But of course, we can also make assessment because there is different possibilities for the countries which are not still members of European Union. They have, in principle, two choices: to join the European Union or to have some form of association with European Union, and as well as to join Custom Union as a full members, Eurasian Economic Union. My question is whether there is analysis, what are the economic consequences of DCFTA agreements, because Ukrainian and Russian academics, they said that it will be a negative result to the economy. They predict a crisis. And then it is a question who will pay. And of course, Mr. Shulga also asked for more sanctions. The sanctions cost a lot for Russia and something like 100 billion for European Union. More sanctions, more bill. I don't know whether European Union supports this idea of more sanctions. Thank you.
I don't think that we negotiated too fast. Moldova negotiated too fast the association agreement. The problem was that our authorities haven't communicated seriously with society, informing it about what it is negotiating, informing it about association agreement commitments and the DCFTA, preparing the business community in order to understand the DCFTA and what kind of reforms, what kind of changes they would have to make. Yes, this was a problem and still is a problem. And also, I would say that Russia was quite fast in exploiting these weaknesses and filled out this gap. I mean, it's with very clear anti-association and DCFTA messages, and by supporting political movements that are very critical of association agreement in Moldova, and also it came with in the last 5 years came with this a new option for Moldova to join not only custom union but also Eurasian integration, and this option is appealing to a good part of our society, which still lives with nostalgic ideas about Soviet Union. For many of our citizens, Soviet Union was the happiest time in their life. So, and they don't know other options, and they are afraid of reforms. They are afraid of taking care of their own destiny. They always, many of our citizens still expect that the state will take care of many of their social needs and economic needs. But we are living in a different. We are trying to develop a society of individuals, not of a society of people who every time would expect that the leader in Chisinau will do everything for them in the village. So we would like to be a society of personalities, which has an initiative and they are knowing their democratic and social rights and exploiting them. But so far we fail to do so. Concerning the Transnistria, well, of course we know. I will not enter in the discussion about Transnistria, how Transnistria started. But I would say that Russian position is not the most constructive at this point in time. So, for instance, Russia is against starting political negotiations together with Transnistrian partner on the future status of Transnistria. And Moldova tried to start the discussion, but every time Transnistria and also Moscow is raising some conditionalities for that. I think that Russia clearly has its interest in Moldova, and together we can draft devise a reasonable cooperation agenda, which would help us to stabilize our country, to make our country stronger, prosperous. But what we have, even for instance, in 2001, when the Communist Party, which was pro-Russian party, came to power, our trade with Russia was 40%. When the communists left the power, our trade with Russia decreased to 22%. And now our main partner is the European Union. And Romania is becoming the first export market for our products. Why? Because Russia, in the recent time, since 2006, set up different kind of economic blockades, wine blockades. Of course, I would say the economic blockades of our wine had a very positive impact. Now we are exporting in many EU countries our wine because our wine has become much better, the quality of our wine, because of Russia. Because we started to think differently. And now, because of the CFTA, we started to exploit the CFTA opportunities. And just 1 month ago, we started to export our wine in Norway. Because after a half a year of quality checking of our wine, and they are importing half of wine we used to bottle wine, we used to export in Russia. And this is because these CFTA opportunities. So, yes, we maybe communicated wars with our society, but we slowly, we are moving in the right direction, and businesses in our country starting to grasp the opportunities and benefits of this FTA. And actually, yes, I have to say that we are losing Russian market, but not because our products are worse and worse, but because Russia is using these instruments in order to make us, to change our mind concerning our future destiny.
Well, I will start from the question about Pankisi Gorge. Well, definitely there were some problems related to the youth who actually were going to ICC, but this is about generally what we need to base our decision when it comes to the visa liberalization. It's a progress report, which is expecting, as far as I know, on the 13th of May. So let's wait and see. And the same problem when the youth are going to join the ICC, it's not a problem only in Georgia. It's some of the EU member states actually are facing the same problems. And this is not a requirement of the visa liberalization action plan which Georgia got in 2013. So let's wait and see of the assessment from the European Commission. Coming to the question from the gentleman here. I'm sure you have read the Taliavini report, and please reread again. Back in 2009, when Taliavini report was published, it was black and white written there that Georgian military forces were provoked by South Ossetian militia, which was basically armed by Russians. That's first. Secondly, this process not only started in August, but it was actually started before that, this provocation. And I can remember you, if you don't remember that, in April 2008, the drone was shot down by Russian MiG-27 in Georgia. Before that, the radar was bombed on the territory of Georgia in 2008. And during the war, there were some civilian casualties, and Russian helicopters actually were bombing Gori, which is outside of the conflict zone, and we're bombing Tbilisi as well. So I know it's very hard now to present the official position of the Russia. It's extremely hard. I don't really wish to do that. So, and I don't really wish to representing the country which is occupant. Thank you.
Yes. On the whether the association agreement was too hastily signed, actually, do you remember when it was started, the whole process? It started in 2005, so actually it took 10 years to negotiate and sign the agreement. I think it's quite a long time. In the beginning of 2005, there was, I don't remember, 10 points, I think, by Solana Ferreira-Waldner, additional points to the ENP original offer to Ukraine, when the new enhanced agreement was offered conditional, on the condition that proper parliamentary elections will take place in 2006. Then after the elections, the negotiations started in 2007. From 2008, the DCFTA part was started to be negotiated. And then it took up to 2012 to negotiate all of this. And I would say that European Union was pretty hard negotiator. It was more like take it or leave it approach. Ukrainian negotiators, those who know the details, they say they wished the present discourse, which is there in Brussels and everywhere in the European Union now about supporting Ukraine and so on, was there at that time. Because at that time it was not like that. At that time it was more like standard trading, bargaining position on external trade agreement with a third country. It was not really about supporting Ukraine by this agreement, by the economic part of this. But anyway, it is like this. And I would say it is, I mean, my answer to this is that it is quite late signature of the agreement, not early. Actually, Ukrainian position was and still is, by the way, to have both free trade with the European Union and with Russia. It has been a permanent position of Ukraine virtually since the beginning of independence. We have signed free trade agreements with CIS and with Russia bilateral agreement back in the 90s. It was the CIS agreement was, new CIS free trade agreement was signed in 2011, and there is no contradiction between DCFTA and the free trade in CIS. It was Russia who decided to apply either or choice, zero-sum game on Ukraine by customs union. Everybody understands that customs union, membership in the customs union is not compatible with free trade with any other, not only European Union, but any other grouping. So it's a Russian decision to apply either or choice on Ukraine. Ukraine still, official Ukrainian position is still not to jeopardize free trade area with Russia and not to jeopardize free trade area with CIS. But Russians say that if DCFTA comes into force, then Russia will not apply CIS rules on Ukraine on the trade with Ukraine. So that's like this. And responding to the representative of Russia, it's a tragedy in our relationship between the people, between the societies. I don't know how many years we will have to heal this pain. We have relatives in Russia. We have friends there, used to have friends, and in many cases still have friends. I wish we come over this soon, but I think we will be able to come over this only when our territory is back. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Zoltán Turai from the Defense Policy Department of the Ministry of Defense of Hungary. My question would be concerning Ukraine. How do you see the chances of splitting away from Russia? And is this a real choice of the Ukrainian society or just a fear from Russia? So is your choice based on real democratic values, the rule of law, and this kind of things? Or are you just afraid of Russia?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My name is James Nixie. I work for a think tank, Chatham House, in London. I'd like to congratulate the panel on 3 excellent presentations. And it's not a platitude, because what you did, gentlemen, was to extol the virtues of your own countries, and you talked about the crimes and misdemeanors of Russia, and that's all very well understood, I think, by most people here. But what you also did was you talked about the deficiencies in your own countries, and that's what comes of having non-governmental speakers on the panel. And I'd just like to push you on that aspect, please. So, from each of you, really, where is the threshold? At what point should the EU and the IMF say to themselves, actually, Ukraine is not implementing its reforms. Moldova is not implementing its reforms. Georgia's not. And actually, and kind of wash our hands with it, reduce for less, move away. The EU has got enough problems as it is. So I don't know, Dmytro, for example, if we see Savik Shuster's TV program being cancelled, as we seem to be, or if we see, I don't know, more oligarchization or the law on denial of the communist past that recently done. I mean, I just worry and I wonder at what point you feel, as independents, not as government speakers, that the EU should actually say to you, actually, enough is enough. We've offered you everything we possibly can, but you haven't performed. And thank you, but goodbye.
Thank you very much. Very last question.
Thank you. My name is Anita Patric. I'm Program Manager of Frontiers of Democracy CU Initiative, and I have two questions actually for Mr. Chkhikvadze. So the first question is related to what just Mr. Nixey said. So you mentioned the EU presence in the region. In what way this presence you would like to, in what way you envision this presence of the EU in the region? And one question related to the, again, said relations with Russia, I have to put it that way. So given the fact that the relatively big part of Georgian territory is occupied by Russian troops, and what you just mentioned, that there are pro-Russian parties and pro-Russian instruments in your country now very active, I'm really curious about how do these pro-Russian parties and pro-Russian elements, including Georgian Orthodox Church, how do they explain what is their narrative about this occupation, which is visible? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Let's give short answers in the reverse order.
Okay, about the answering the question of whether it is more like fear of Russia. Of course it is. Of course, Russia actually made our European choice. If not Russia, I mean, not only European choice, Ukrainian political nation is being born now because of Russia. Congratulations to Mr. Putin. I mean, his better strategy would have been to after Maidan, just to wait until Ukrainians will quarrel between themselves. I think in 1 year we really had a sort of quarrel like after post-Orange situation. Now we have unity. Now we have political nation. Congratulations. Unfortunately, the price is quite huge for us. But for the Russians, I mean, if you are afraid of Banderovцы are in Kharkiv now. They are close to Donetsk. So it's because of you. Then about the domestic developments, reforms, and so on. You know, it's also difficult to assess because sometimes it's really kind of. I don't want to give precise assessment of like. I mean, there is now two different discourses in Ukraine as well. One discourse is that there is no reforms, everything is bad, failure, Maidan was in vain, and everything. Another discourse is like there's a lot of things going on, huge work in the government, everybody's kind of involved, every expert is involved in discussing a lot of initiatives, pieces of legislation, whatever. The parliament is voting for dozens of new laws every week. Maybe the reality may be somewhere in the middle. Because first, of course, I mean, I can witness it because I am more or less kind of involved in a lot of discussions. And I see really that the government is trying to do and really launched a lot of reforms. We maybe just don't mention it because we like kind of really take for granted good things. But for instance, where is Rosukrenergo? Where is our other corruption schemes which used to be there? And a lot of other positive examples. But the problem is that most of the reforms, I mean, they are launched just recently, and it takes time to really to have the outcome which is felt by the citizens. So I think here is the gap between the process of real, the governmental process, which is not ideal at all, which has, I think, much more to do with, the deficiencies has much more to do with the capacity, not maybe with the political will, but rather with the capacity on various levels. And the gap between the process of work of the government, of this whole machine, and the effects which will be felt only with some time. And in the middle, there's a really huge gap, which consumes also propaganda, which consumes security threats, and the orientation of the population and economic crisis, and so on and so on. So, in such a difficult situation, I would not join either the claim that there is nothing happening in the EU needs to just drop it off, and also I would not support the claim that EU just needs to support without any conditions. Of course, the conditions should be there. Of course, you should be very strictly watching. And actually, my advice is to watch even more closely, because, for instance, if we look at screening exercise, it is actually the instrument of watching, more concrete watching of concretely watching, not just let's do some reforms and just now you haven't produced some effects, so there's no reforms. No, concretely, what specifically, what is the gap between Ukrainian legislation, Ukrainian practice, and European practice and legislation requirements of the Association Agreement? So that's my response. Thank you.
I'll start from James. I think that only scenario when the EU should say no to these countries would be when the people, this population, would say no to the EU integration in general. It's not about the elites. It's about the general population. And since the support goes down and it's close to zero, then it would be time when the EU says that, guys, goodbye. So, sorry, I just missed the question in the first session. In the first round. The thing is that, as I said, so far there are no tangible results of the EU integration, and there is and I would like to combine these two questions. The pro-Russian parties are saying that EU is offering the opportunities where Russia is offering benefits. You know, association agreement is all about the opportunities, and Russia is saying that, okay, guys, my market is open for you. You can bring any kind of cucumber, and there is no standards. You can, if there is no somebody like Mr. Onyshenko who just wakes up in the morning and says that we should close this market. And the EU is saying that, oh, this cucumber should look like this, like that, you know. So that's one of the narratives they're trying to sell. Secondly, there's a very, and I'm very afraid, frankly speaking, in one of the tools that is in Russian sense. This is a visa-free travel. Georgians need visas to go to Russia, and if one day Russia lifts the visas, it would be quite a blow to Georgia's pro-European integration. So this is something we have to be very careful, and I think that it would be before. Or sorry, later on, when when the European Union lifts visa requirements for the Georgians, then it would be okay. As for the question to what are the narratives, they say that actually, well, Russia is occupying that territory, but if you want to have the solution of these conflicts, you shouldn't go to NATO, you shouldn't go to the European Union. The key of solving these conflicts lies in Moscow. So that's their narratives. But some of the parties, like former chairperson of the parliament, Nino Burjanadze, she always tries to avoid answering the question whether Russia is occupant or not. So that's their approach to these things.
I think that time has come in Moldova for EU to say that, guys, enough is enough. But at the same time, I disagree with the idea that EU should say goodbye Moldova. It's going to be a great mistake. It's going to trigger a deep crisis in Moldova. We shouldn't forget that now 400,000 Moldovans already have EU citizenship. And the EU should have a responsibility also, because they are, for instance, at the last Europarliamentarian elections, they voted for their candidates. Most of them are active EU citizens. Most of them are working living in the European Union countries, for instance in Italy, and they are paying taxes to local communities. There are 200,000 Moldovans are working legally in the European Union, legally. So if you would say goodbye, I would say that many Moldovans would say our single option is getting united with Romania. And this is going to make even deeper the divide that is in our society. And the question would be, because majority of Moldovans would like to have an independent country, to live in an independent country. And of course this would trigger, again, suspicions, disagreements between between Moldovans and different minorities, which would like to be closer to European Union. Transnistria would be a lost territory forever. The idea of reintegrating Transnistria would disappear. Any kind of reforms, meaningful reforms, also would disappear because, of course, Russia is inviting us in customs unions, but is not pressing our kleptocracy to make reforms or to make our justice system more honest and unbiased politically. This is true. No, this is true. Because all these politicians who play with Russia are deeply corrupted in Moldova. And I know what I'm saying. And all these politicians with whom Russia is playing are not trustworthy, even for Russia. And they will betray Russia. I assure you, with the first occasion. So I think that the EU should press with reforms. EU should be more seriously, I mean, not seriously, because it is seriously engaged, but should be much more honest with corrupted politicians. And I truly think that the EU should devise new instruments of making these corrupted politicians and elite more willing to make reforms. And for instance, a blacklist for corrupted officials and corrupted businesses should be put in place by the European Union. European Union shouldn't speak and negotiate and play different kind of stability games with corrupted politicians in Moldova.
Let me thank you all the three panelists for having transmitted this live information.